Most unlikely of villains, schools of pain and forepaws. Does he talk? Does he know how? Does he bottle? Does he meow? Let on the cerebral bore. Ever show him so much more? Will leave your brains at the
Aloha, gentlemen, the esteemed panel of Cerebrivore. This is Brian calling. I don't know if I'm the furthest caller, because if you get Jules or someone else from out here way on the other side, you may get someone further. But Brian calling in from Singapore. Yeah, just wanted to call. So I really appreciate your discussions. So in particular, I believe it was the end of last month, juggling a busy life in TTRPGs is pretty timely. That one is right up my alley, because for many stretches of time, my interaction with RPGs boils down to reading games, maybe a bit of podcasting and listening to podcasts, and then occasionally getting the online game, which is now expanded to in person. So I do empathize with everyone else going through this. So one thing I've found that has helped, and especially this has been true in Singapore, is finding stores, groups, meetups, etc., that are open to players coming and going, whether it's for one shots or even for, in the case I found here, a campaign. So not just in Singapore, but back in Australia, we've got a group that meets at a coffee / gaming location. It's kids and adults, but it tends to be very one-shot focused, or campaigns where they know people will come and go just because not everyone can make it. And I'm finding this works really well, especially if it's a little bit more, I'd say, low pressure. Now, again, these tend to be public until you start going a few times, and then you can build relationships. But it's kind of eased the I guess, the pressure for me, especially because most of the other folks there are similar in that they've got pretty busy lives. And it may be hard to really codify this or replicate it other than some general guidelines. To be fair, in Singapore, we still kind of have 4-hour sessions set up. And mostly because, obviously, like with many places, you make an effort to get there. You want it to, you want to be able to last and enjoy it. But one thing I've found is it would do just as well for me if it was a bit shorter, provided you can start on time. And I say this thinking about kind of some of the weeknight sessions, whether they're in person or online. Again, I guess your results and your mileage or your kilometers will vary, but I don't know. Just some thoughts here as I sit here working away in hot, humid Singapore, thinking about hopefully getting back to the group this weekend locally in game. Cheers, guys.
Hey, Brian, thank you so much for that call. Of course, I'm Jason in the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Today's episode is a bonus episode. I've had strep throat. I'm recording this on June 17th, and I've had a fever all month since like the 3rd. And it's been a pain in the butt. They've switched my antibiotics recently, so hopefully that's going to knock this thing down and get me back in action. But I've been really at action podcasting. We haven't been able to record very many episodes, but it's great to know people are out there listening, Brian. Brian, of course, now lives in Australia, American. I don't know if he'd consider himself an expat. His partner is an Australian, and they moved out there. But he's at Singapore for work, I believe. But yeah, I don't know. Minion, who was on a previous episode, lives in Japan, but you guys are definitely on the outer edges. And actually, we're planning on having Jules join us for a discussion. Tentatively, the subject of that discussion is alignment, so we're really looking forward to that. So, yeah, we are trying to include people from all corners of the globe in this discussion. As far as doing, for pickup games and getting people in there with our busy schedules, the idea of one-shots and doing open tables where anybody could just show up and play, I agree with that. Personally, I like the idea of having pre-gens, and you have a pre-generated party, and whoever shows up that day just picks one of the party members, and they play them and the party members advance normally. They get experience and all normally, but you don't necessarily have to always play the same person. So that way the party is going to slowly advance through the adventure, but whoever shows up that night is going to take that part of that player or that player character at that day at the table. And I know that ruffles against the feathers of people that like deep backstories and deep connections to their characters. But I think for a lot of us, if we just showed up and said, hey, here, you're playing JoJo the Fighter tonight and you're playing Bobby the Cleric, I think most people would be okay with that and just sit down and get into it, and they can put their own little spin on the character if they want. And the key is you don't play them like a rental car where you don't play them where you're trying to burn the character out or destroy the character, but you play it trying to survive. And, so the character's there for the next person. But if they're not, you can, the GM can always make a different character between sessions. As far as the length, yeah, definitely for online. And I could see for weeknights in person too, 2 to 3 hours. And 2 to 3 hours doesn't sound very long, but online, if you're doing, say, Theater of the Mind, I think you can get a whole lot done in that time frame. I've got a good buddy of mine who actually was one of the first people I ever played online with. This is way before COVID. This is like 2016, 2017. And he runs a lot of Barbarians of Lemuria. And he tends to run 2-hour sessions. It's all Theater of the Mind. He might draw a sketch and put it up. We'll do it with a video and voice chat only. Rolling dice at home, paper character sheets, all that. And we get a lot done in those sessions. We really do, because you're not fiddling with the VTTs, And I think we get a whole lot done. That's not to say you couldn't get a lot done with the VTT too, if everybody's familiar with the VTT. But if you have people asking, where's that button, and trying to learn the system at the VTT as you're going, I think that slows things down. But yeah, no, I think those are some great ideas, Brian. Thank you for sharing them. Anybody else, if you have thoughts, call into Cerebrivore. We love to get calls from people. We love to answer them. Because of my strep, I have been out of it. My voice is just starting to come back. So I am not part of this discussion coming up, which is fine because I have no experience with organized play. I've never done that. So it's a very interesting discussion coming up with BJ, Carl, and our friend Matt. So I'm going to let you guys listen to that conversation about organized play with D&D, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care, folks.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Cerebrivore. This is BJ, Boyd of the Arcane Alienist podcast. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about living campaigns, organized play. I'm joined by Carl Rodriguez of the Gemologist Presents. How you doing, Carl?
I'm doing great. Just
and we have
just ending our awesome Abomination Vaults Pathfinder 2, which you and our special guest participate in.
Right. And our special guest today is our buddy Matt, who plays in Pathfinder and several other of the games that are. He's not a podcaster, but he hangs out with podcasters to play Pathfinder and other role playing games. You might know him as @Erks on various Discord channels. How are you doing, Matt?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing good. So, we don't have a whole lot of structure for this discussion. We're kind of doing this on the fly, but we wanted to talk about our experiences playing in, running, being part of organized play, and how that may differ from your home campaigns that you do, at home with your friends or online with your friends. So that's where we'll get the ball started. Matt, since you are our special guest, and also because I know you have done a lot with Living Greyhawk, which is one of the first organized campaigns, and it was one of the more long-lasting ones. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what was the setup for that like when you were a part of that?
Oh, yeah. So Living Greyhawk was introduced with 3rd edition D&D. There was a living campaign that was prior to that was Living City, which was used 2nd edition. AD&D rules as part of the I guess previous it was TSR. They had a role-playing game association, RPGA, that ran that. And then so when 3rd edition was announced, Wizards of the Coast had purchased D&D at that point. They were going to release the new edition of D&D, and they were going to start this shared campaign. They called it Living Greyhawk. In 3rd edition, they used Greyhawk as the standard default setting with all the gods and stuff. It was a really interesting way they had that set up because they had used the RPGA membership list to figure out how many people had registered in the different areas of the world. You know, these states had more people and whatnot. And then they split up the, they kind of had a top-down structure with a circle of 5 or circle of 6 people that worked for Wizards of the Coast. And then under that, there was a triad in each of these different regions. And so where I was at, North Carolina, there was North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. We had Grand March was our region. Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland were the Grand Duchy of Jeff, were all the Against the Giants adventures. And so each of these, you know, you'd go to the conventions and you could play these games, and you started out as a first level character. They did have a lot of rules to make it where, you know, to keep people from cheating, you know, kind of a thing. They used a stat pie, and then you know, you'd go to these conventions. It was entertaining. The that ran from like 2000 to 2008. I think 4th edition came out or was announced around 2007 maybe, and they kind of moved on to the next one, which was Living Forgotten Realms. But they also had Living Force, which was the Star Wars one. Mm-hmm.
Oh, they had like a living jungle, right? Like I thought they were something.
You know, they had. I was going to say the Texas, Oklahoma area where Carl and I would have been in, or it was the Bandit Kingdoms.
Yeah, that was Bandit Kingdoms.
Yeah. But I think with the idea, if I remember right, because I think I checked it out, I never got a chance to actually go to an event and play because there was no game store where I lived during that period. If you're playing kind of in your home game store, you're kind of a adventurer in whatever region, the Bandit Kingdoms or wherever you would be.
Yeah.
But if you happen to go on vacation or go on a business trip or for some reason find yourself in another part of the country, it's kind of the idea that your character had traveled to that region of the Flyness and picked up an adventure there.
And that really was a big draw for people. We would drive. Well, I was telling you just the other day, me and one of the other guys that plays in Carl's Twilight 2000 campaign, we went to Alabama, flew over there for a convention so that we could play yeomanry modules. The whatever the free, it was a very libertarian region, and we went over there specifically to play those modules.
Was your loot given to you in cryptocurrency? Sorry.
I have a question, Matt. So you can finish your thought, but I had a question about something you said when you're describing the living Greyhawk. But go ahead and finish your thought here about
So the way that they had that set up, every character, you could have multiple characters. They all started out like at level 1, like I was saying. They were all assigned 52 time units, and each adventure would take either 1 or 2 time units, maybe more if it was depending on the length of the adventure. And it was kind of like to say that, you know, it's going to be like a week out of your life. Not that it was like 1 time unit equals 1 week, but, you know, some might be a little bit longer, some might be a little less. So it was averaging. And then if you were playing out of region, then you actually had to be physically there. You know, you couldn't play. So I never played any Bandit Kingdom adventures. That was Texas and Oklahoma. In fact, there's on Amazon, one of the Triad members for Bandit Kingdoms wrote up a whole self-published book on the Bandit Kingdoms, the whole Living Greyhawk campaign thing. Wow. So you would go to these. You'd go to other states to play their games. You'd play your own games in the state that you were in, and then there were core adventures that anybody could play anywhere, and those were like ones that were set in some of the unassigned areas. But they had split up the entire world in like different areas, so it was pretty fascinating. And each area had 3 people called a triad. That kind of managed things. You had meta organizations, which were like groups that your character could join. Grand March was a mandatory military service, so it was a very military-oriented society with knights and stuff. Knights of the Watch were kind of a big part of it, and so a lot of the adventures were kind of set in that sort of theme. Grand Duchy of Jeff, they had the whole story with the giants had invaded, come down from the mountains, and it conquered everything. And so, for 7 years, they had multiple plots that were running, but there was like the big main plot had to do with the giants that had taken over the country, which was pretty fascinating. And a lot of these guys still are involved with role-playing games. So some of the guys at Paizo, they were involved with Living Greyhawk,
Cool.
Stephen Radley, McFarland, SRM.
I know there's a Ben McFarland, but so I guess we jumped an edition though. Didn't you say you played in the organized play for 4th edition, right?
Yeah, I think Living Greyhawk was 3rd edition.
Yeah, 3 and 3.5.
3 and 3.5.
Living Jungle that I was referencing is 2nd edition actually.
Yeah,
part of the Living City RPGA. I guess that's where you had the Ravens Bluff, and they made
Mhm.
books.
Yeah, that was a Forgotten Realms.
From cheating, Matt. It's,
Hmm?
You said they prevented people from cheating. Was that just because they did like point buy, or I mean,
Well,
how could someone not come in and say, "Well, my character got a corporal sword"?
So well, I guess you could never prevent things, but they did a point buy for stats for your attributes. They had a log sheet where at the end of the adventure, which these adventures were all set like a standard kind of a 4-hour convention slot. So it'd be like a 3-hour adventure. If it ran long, maybe like 3.5, and then like half an hour wrap up. The 2nd edition, the Living City, they had things set up where you'd had treasure, where it was certificates, which people called certs. They like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, like split into 4 strips, and then so you have like a +1 sword or something, and it would say this is where the adventure, where the item came from, what adventure, and the date and the dungeon master signature on there, and
That's cool.
and stuff. And if you traded it, you had to sign the back over to and have a dungeon master witness it, sort of a thing.
Like a car, like exchange, like handing over a car title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still like honor system, though, really, right? I mean,
Yeah.
But that's
if
cool.
I remember the stuff they would give you, the official materials, it would be like your thing that required a DM signature, and the cards that had, I got this piece of treasure. They were at least on card stock, so you couldn't just swipe a book and go down to the Kinko's. And I mean, you could, but you'd have to invest some money. As far as the signatures, those probably would have been easy, but
Oh yeah.
you
Well,
could just put it on standard copy paper.
I mean, there is a lot of honor system kind of involved, because there's nothing to prevent somebody to make copies of this stuff and then sign somebody's name to it and say, oh, I got this when I was in San Francisco or something, and like anybody's going to be able. I mean, there was RPGA had RPGA membership numbers, and so they would have they'd have the name of the signature of the DM and their name and their number. So I guess there were some people that were banned, but
so there were any instances where you kind of knew that there was someone with some contraband, I guess.
We had a guy that was in North Carolina that ended up, they had sent their adventures off to the Wizards of the Coast to get reviewed and approved, and they ended up not getting approval in time, and the convention was coming up, and they ended up running them. And then that was a big scandal. The guy got kicked out of the RPGA banned for a year or two or something. That was like a big deal, but then that ended up kind of going away. The second edition, the Living City campaign, they had these certificates, and it ended up getting a little bit goofy because you would end up having these tables at conventions where, because there wasn't enough tables to kind of like set up where you had like a high level table, high level characters, and a low level, you'd have a mixture of high and low level characters at the same table. And then you'd have these high level, these people that had played a lot, and they'd have just like a 3-ring binder full of these certificates of, magic items and whatnot. And they'd be like, oh, I've got some extra magic items. I see that you just started playing. Here have a bunch of +3 swords and, whatnot. It's like first level characters that were like, oh, well, boy.
It's very Monty Hall, I guess.
Yeah. Or be like in World of Warcraft, where you've got somebody who's got a high level character and they just follow the new guild member around and help them survive all their encounters to build up their XP.
Yeah. And the, in an MMO, a lot of them use the whole bind on pickup, so you can't trade stuff.
Yep.
And that wasn't the case with Living City, to my knowledge. I didn't really play Living City all that much because I had gotten more into that when third edition was in full swing. Living City lasted a little bit, like a few years. The people had invested so much time in it that they didn't want the campaign to end, so they kept on running it. Second edition D&D, and then third edition D&D had started, I think, around 2000.
Did third edition D&D, did the organized play bleed into the fourth edition time frame too? I guess it would have, right?
A little bit, I think. There were some other campaigns that ran in there. Like I was saying, Living Force was the Star Wars, the Star Wars D20. There was a Living Death one, which was the
Mask of the Red Mask.
Yes, it was the Mask of the
Ravenloft.
Yeah.
Or the Mask.
I never played
Living
that.
Death was Mask of the Red Death second edition. It started in second edition, but they carried it over in third edition.
Oh, wow.
All I know is that was the.
Did you run campaigns in parallel or play campaigns in parallel?
Oh yeah, I did. There was a Living Calamar, which was Kinzer Company. They had a campaign. Living Dragonstar role playing game, which was kind of like Starfighter. You and I have talked about that in the past.
There was a Living Spycraft. I'm looking at a list online. Okay. Living Spycraft from 2002 to 2007.
That was that whole decade was kind of I don't know what's the right word, heady, I guess. That with the open gaming license, you just had everybody came out with their OGL, third party stuff. So there was the Codex of Erd, the ERDE. They had a campaign. Arcanus had a campaign.
Jeez. Yeah, and then I guess it all got scrunched down in fourth edition, right? That was Encounters, is that right, Pete?
Well, they started off fourth edition with Living Forgotten Realms, so they basically took the Living Greyhawk model and just ported it over for fourth edition and did it in Forgotten Realms.
But no more OGL, so
yeah. And I played in a few of those when fourth edition had first come out, and it was very similar to, you had a new registered number with Wizards. That was your player number, and then it was on your character sheet, and you had a ledger that the DMs would sign when you went through an adventure. But they were very short. Like you could do 3 of them in a typical.
Yeah, they're more like encounters, right? They
were kind of 1 hour adventures.
Yeah. And you could do multiples.
Yeah, because when I would do it, I would have to drive like an hour and a half to get to the place where they were doing them. So I would do like 3 of them. I'd stay in the game shop all evening and do 3 of them. And same thing, if you picked up any significant loot, you would get a card that showed that you had gotten this magic item or if I'm remembering correctly. But I remember as a player, there's probably it was one of those head scratchers because they had this very formulaic way of doing it. They always included a fourth edition style skill challenge.
Right.
And if anybody who lived through fourth edition knows that I don't even know that the game designers understood how to do a skill challenge, because every DM who has supposedly met like before the night and looked at all the campaigns and played each other, ran each other at the same event, none of the DMs would run the skill challenge the same. The way it's described to do it in the player's handbook is different than the way the DMG describes it, and is very different than what Wizards design team would tell you on social media when you'd go, hey, how does this supposed to work? So, but that was really funny because I can remember doing 3 skill challenges over the course of 3 hours, and each one of them I didn't even know I was doing a skill challenge. Because the just didn't make like, and some of the DMs were having to like telegraph, I need you to pick a skill and tell me how you're going to use it.
Right.
Which, skill challenge are supposed to be announced. This is a skill challenge. Here are the relevant skills. The people who are but that anyway. But yeah, I think it didn't last through the entirety of fourth edition. I think it was probably the first half. I'm sorry, Carl, go ahead.
No, I was gonna explain like I never got into because we're contrasting this to like our own campaigns. I never got into Living Greyhawk, Living Forgotten Realms in second or third edition. I just ran my own things in the Forgotten Realms, and I guess maybe because I never went to conventions or were. But you didn't have to go to conventions. You could have done it anywhere. And I guess I never. Maybe I wasn't as involved at Dragon's Lair back then. But then it wasn't until fourth edition where, before I was an employee there during graduate school, I would still go to Dragon's Lair, and they'd have these organized play things, and not just for D&D, but I think that my first experience with organized play was Shadowrun missions, right? So you'd run like a series of Shadowrun missions that were intended to be like a 2 to 3 hour kind of time block, and run these missions in sequential order. And then that's when the fourth edition came out, and I remember actually you had to use a DC Wizards had to use a DCI number, which is the same number you'd use for like Magic, right?
Yeah.
So, but then you could sign up for DCI as a GM or as a player, and and that led to some weird things where you could if you're a player and then run the game, that's cool. But sometimes you'd GM the game and then run it, and some people did that, which that kind of didn't sit well with me. But that was like my fourth edition era experience. So unlike Matt, I kind of got into the organized play thing relatively recently, when it kind of became a bit more, because it seems like Living Greyhawk, while there was some formality, it seems it gave you a lot of flexibility, which is kind of cool. Almost like it was closer to a campaign that you ran on your own, right? I don't know. Is that accurate, Matt?
Well, they had adventures, so each region had the ability to, release something like a dozen adventures per year, and they all had to go through a review process and play testing and that sort of stuff. But it was the region that, largely the Triad. They came up with sort of the plot of this is what what the main story, and sort of like, some adventures might not have anything to do with that story, but it did allow a very focused fleshing out of a region. The creative juices of we're going to have this region, and this is the background, what little is written of in the different, World of Greyhawk and in different Greyhawk books, and then Cannon Fire and Living Greyhawk Gazetteer, these different sources of information. And then, you could just kind of whole hog is like, let's populate this area with towns and personalities and NPCs, come up with these stories And they have these meta organizations, like I was saying, which was the different groups. So like if you were, in the, kind of, we were doing the Temple of Elemental Evil stuff. Well, it's like there's a group up in that area, and I forget if it's Valuna or Verbabonk, but it's the Gnarly Rangers, Rangers of the Gnarly Forest. And that was a organization that if you met these prerequisites, you could say, oh, I'm going to join this group. And there was we were mainly using Yahoo groups to do a lot of that coordination sort of stuff. And so there would be some role playing stuff on there, and there'd be like some sort of benefit, maybe. Nothing too, powerful, but. And then, there was certain organizations where it's like, oh, well, if you want to belong to this organization, then you're going to have to spend so many time units of your character doing that. And that would reduce the total number of time units to the 52 per year. So most people had multiple characters, especially if you were, going to all these different gaming conventions or playing in the game stores. I mean, you could even run the modules in a home group. You'd have to, set up a game day kind of a thing, register the games on the RPGA website, so that it was legit, sanctioned event or whatever they called it.
Yeah. I feel like when they finally abandoned the Living Forgotten Realms, when they replaced it with encounters, they really went much more to a, hey, just let the game store host the event and get people to play, and it's not going to be they put it on the retailer to kind of incentivize and organize stuff however they saw fit, and there was no.
Yeah, there's no continuous story, really. I mean.
Yeah.
So I mean, there was shared adventures, but there's no like what Matt said is kind of in a way like what we talked about, having a shared universe that these people came up with, and they have a shared universe, and there's like a meta plot that and all these people. That's kind of the way I felt like missions was, because when you fill out the form for missions, then you say what happened, and then at the end of the season, they would go, okay, this is generally what happened. In all these, 55% of the group did this or that, and then that's how they would construct then the next season based on that, right? So
yeah,
I thought it was kind of
yeah. They would do typically the way that I saw it was the premiere event, and usually for Living Greyhawk, these adventures would premiere at a gaming convention in that particular area. And they would take the results. So at the end of the game, the DM would have like the last page of the PDF. Well, you would print it out, and there'd be like a page there that said, return this information to the triad for the region. And it would say, did the adventurers succeed in this? Did this character die or whatever? And then they would tally up and say, okay, 55% of the tables killed the bad guy or whatever, and therefore that would inform future adventures, provided that they weren't just pulling the wool over our eyes and just saying, yeah, this guy's going to escape or something. I guess that's always a possibility, but but otherwise, it did have the shared campaign thing where you had multiple tables running the same adventure. Did pose the problem of sort of you would have to have a certain amount of just getting past the fact that it's like, well, at our table, this happened, but the way that the majority of tables went, something else happened. So you kind of just had to, disbelieve that.
So Carl, you said that you had gotten into organized play when you were working in grad school, when you were working in a game store.
Yeah.
And was that Living Greyhawk, or was that by the time they had switched over to encounters?
No, that was encounters,
Okay. Did you run encounters or just playing them, or go ahead? Sorry.
No, I ran encounters and played in them. I usually play in them through, and then run them myself, learning how to do that, or the other way around, run them for some players and then they in turn would. But we never had there were people who were notorious for, GMing and then running and trying to get their don't know, DCI points or whatever you would get. But
Yeah.
I wanted to amend that what I said about missions. It is much like Matt said, is you'd have, I think they came out like monthly or every other month, and you'd have to report it, and then that would inform the next year. Which I thought is really cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of it embodies that sort of living idea. And I feel like they went away from that in fourth edition. I could be wrong, but
yeah, well, with Encounter, originally they did. I don't know if they shaped future adventures based on feedback from the existing living fourth edition, but by Encounters, it was just sort of, here's a very short campaign that's meant to last, 6 to 8 sessions, and hour-long sessions. Pick a night every Wednesday night at 7:00. I think initially they wanted everybody to do it on Wednesday night, and then it was more like, hey, as long as you're do it whenever you want. We're not going to check on you and make sure that you actually did it on Wednesday night. I think the main thing they were just trying to encourage retailers is not to have it compete against Friday Night Magic.
Right.
But they were just...
You have to send in all the reports of all the games. I remember having to do that, right? So
yeah. So you would get your credits as with your DCI number for playing, but as far as how long the session took and how many people played, and that was kind of between the store owner and whoever they got to DM the game. I remember there were DM rewards for that. Like we get special, extra materials, tokens, and
the store would get rewards too.
The store would.
They wouldn't bump their premier store status stuff like Magic did, but the store would get special promos here and there.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know so much about the retailer because I just had a friend who ran a comic book and game store, and I was like, I'll do it. He said, I need somebody to DM this. Okay, I'll do it. I had a lot of time about
coordinator. I was like the events coordinator,
Yeah, we did good. The table got so big, somebody else had to become a DM. Mm-hmm. There for about 6 to 8 months, we had like 25 people. We would both run 2 sessions of and it was kind of rocking and rolling. So, fourth edition didn't overall do well, but in the little corner we were in there for about a year, people were having a good time, and it helped build a community. And I made new friends that I then invited to my home campaign when we had openings. But I know that additionally, the encounters were sort of set in the generic fourth edition setting, but they had a lot of Greyhawk lore. They never really said this is Greyhawk. But they had one based on like the Lost Tower of Inverness, and they had one that was based on, Lost Magic that was developed by Everard. And then towards the end, they shifted more to Neverwinter being the setting and having it being a Forgotten Realms based thing. So, with that one it was pretty easy. What?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I ran the Neverwinter one. I didn't run the book because that was probably the first time they published. They gave you a Neverwinter Encounters adventure, and they co-published a Neverwinter source book where you could have your own adventure, which is kind of what we got later at 5th edition as well, where there's, they've got the same theme going on in 2 different campaigns to choose from. But I had a good time running. I felt like, they were short, easy to run adventures, and you got them a couple weeks before you were supposed to start running them and had time to prep, and there wasn't too much paperwork on my end as the DM, but I don't know what the store owner had to do when I left for the night.
The owner didn't do it. They'd give it to one of the employees.
Well, where I was at, the store owner it was like him and he had him and his wife, and they had one guy they paid.
Yeah, I mean, I remember running encounters for Eberron too, though. So like there was some organized.
Yeah, they did do some Eberron, and once they released, and they did some Dark Sun too.
Yeah. I think for each book because I mean, really, like 4th edition did like one GM's book, one player's book for a whole host of settings, right? So
yeah.
Did you experience any encounters, Matt, or were you kind of?
No, I got really busy with work around the time that Living Greyhawk had ended. Living Greyhawk had been, they had announced 4th edition D&D, and then by the end of that year, they had announced that Living Greyhawk was going away. It was one of the sad things because, Wizards of the Coast, I understand it's a business, but they were always kind of pushing, the new product and they wanted you to buy it. that was, I don't know, in my corner of the world, and I know that's just one perspective, but fourth edition didn't really go over too well because nobody thought that the game was broken or needing. I mean, well, 3.5 eventually got kind of long in the tooth with all the books and stuff, but for the people that have been playing it for 7 years,
nobody wanted a new game,
and so they didn't really. And then they said, "Oh yeah, Living Greyhawk's going to end," which kind of put a damper on things. But there was a big difference between fourth edition and or Living Forgotten Realms, which I think is what the initial one was called when that was announced, because I think it was much more centralized. They didn't have the regions like what Living Greyhawk. I mean, it was a very unique system, the way that they just kind of split, Texas and Oklahoma was Bandit Kingdoms. All these different, Nyrond was California, I think.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, they have not done that. I mean,
but it was a very unique time. You're talking about, it was the year 2000. You had a lot of people that had played D&D back in those early years, in the 70s and 80s. And, there are a lot of people like my age that, they cut their teeth in the early years, and then, they were out of college and they were, making a bunch of money and had the ability to go to conventions and whatnot, the career kind of a thing. Buy all those flat books, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, BJ.
I was going to round out I had a thing to round out the encounters, but I want to see if you have anything to say about it.
No, because I was going to segue into the next kind of facet of organized play that kind of came up around encounters.
So towards the very end of fourth edition, they did a second organized play called Lair Assault, and that was supposed to be tournament style. Get a team, make your optimized character, see how far you can get into the dungeon before everybody dies. And I never ran any of those. I remember I got the first packet and then I got busy and wasn't able to run it. But I thought, here's an example of, and maybe this is why they had so many problems with fourth edition, about sort of sometimes like the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing. They had just published the Neverwinter campaign setting and given you a resource for Neverwinter as a sandbox, and said, and gave you some figures that you could decide as a DM, is this a hero, a villain, a neutral party? Is this a benefactor or a potential ally? You decide as the DM. This is your lore now. But then they published a Lair Assault where one of those figures was the villain. And I know you can just say, you know what, he's not a bad guy in my campaign. But it's kind of like, but I want them to figure out if he's a bad guy in my campaign. And if you've just labeled him bad, you can never put a wizard in front of a group of seasoned D&D players whose name is Vecna, and then go, oh, maybe he's not really a super villain.
Unless you're a character in Stranger Things. But that's
right.
That's another podcast.
Yeah. but there are those classic D&D,
Right.
Did you hear about the new church of Takesis? She sounds good to me if you're in Kryn. No, so you can't do that if the spoilers are out. So, but I never ran that. But I know they tried to bring that back, and then I don't know if that wasn't popular, if it was just that was the end of fourth edition and just died on the vine with the rest of the edition. But I just didn't want to know if that was one other kind of organized play they tried alongside encounters at the end of fourth edition, more of the tournament style. See how long you can last in the dungeon of death.
Yeah, and I think what picked up that slack was Paizo with Pathfinder, right? And Pathfinder had a pretty strong organized play that's still going strong in Pathfinder 2. And of course, they have the branch out with Starfinder organized play. And those are kind of, I mean, it doesn't seem like it's as unique as Living Greyhawk was. But it's a model where much like without the kind of, there's a meta plot, and you can take your character anywhere to whatever whatever convention or online. And actually, I think what was cool is at least somewhere in that organized play, one of the seasons they decided, well, let's just let them play whatever they want, and you could actually you could actually report your like adventure path games. So you would get. I mean, I don't know. You wouldn't necessarily get like I don't know what kind of credit you'd really get, but just wanted those reported and wanted to kind of see what people were playing, what was going on.
Yeah. I think Adventurers League has kind of picked up on some of those ideas. Yeah. I think Wizards of the Coast learned a lot about the things they did wrong by seeing what Paizo did successfully.
Yeah. Yeah, and both of those, Adventure League and Pathfinder Society, are going strong, and there's like a meta plot. There's factions. I think faction play is something that's fascinating to me, and I no, they really didn't have that in missions, but from what I remember, but they definitely had that. They have that strong faction component in Pathfinder Society, where like you get not only do you have the main mission, but then you have like a side mission based on your faction, which I think is pretty fascinating. I think, and Adventure League does that too, right? With
well, Adventure League, they have the official Adventurers League series of adventures for a season, but it also you can just use whatever hardback. Like the big first one was Tyranny of Dragons, where you could play Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat, or you could play their one set in the Moonsea region. Right. And you don't have to play. You can go back. Like even now I can't remember how many years we're into. Are we in the 7th year of 5th edition? You could go back and play the first one as an organized Adventurers League at your local store with your local group, and it still counts as an Adventurers League adventure. You don't have to play the one that they've just published and that's kind of out right now. Yeah. Matt, did you ever get involved with any of the Paizo organized play?
A little bit. I remember it's not nearly as much as I did with Living Greyhawk. Like I was saying, around the end of 2000 into 2008, 2009 or so, I just got so busy that I kind of just started doing home campaign stuff.
Did you run games for when you were doing Living Greyhawk?
Very rarely. I actually had a kind of a sad story about that. I was at a gaming convention in the Raleigh area, North Carolina, and I had an open slot. There wasn't anything that I was doing. And this guy, one of the organizers, came up to me and said, "Oh, hey, we had a no-show. There's no DM for this game. Would you mind running it?" And I was like, "Oh, wow." It's like, let me, do you have a copy of the adventure? It's all printed out. I have by 11 paper. And so I'm reading this thing. Unbeknownst to me, my wife had won a raffle for a seat at a table that Dave Arneson was running. And so I ended up missing my chance to play a game with Dave Arneson.
Oh, no. Did your wife go to play in the game with Dave Arneson?
No, but
you guys ever have seen any of Jim Davis, who does the YouTube channel? He calls himself the Game Methuselah. He was there on the ground. He was a college student when D&D came out, and but he has a fun story about him and his friend just completely ruining one of Dave Arneson's first convention games by betraying the party.
I don't know. Sometimes I think people have no sense of that. I mean, I when I been to North Texas RPG Con, I played in a game run by Zeb Cook, and I feel like people didn't know who this person was, even though everyone was going up to him and having him sign their books. Second edition book. Like I had him sign my old OA book, and then they were still like, asses at the table. No sense of respect or
no respect for the elders. Yeah.
Millennials.
So Matt, I guess, Matt, the reason I asked that, I was wondering what did they provide any kind of perks or rewards to the DMs during Living Greyhawk?
I think they may have. I know they got, especially once Pathfinder Society, they started to do things like where DMs could play an adventure that they would run Or because they would in Living Greyhawk, if you ran an adventure, then you couldn't play it, and so they talked about eating the adventure. It was like, if you're gonna run it without playing it, then you couldn't get credit. You could play it and then run it, which is typically, a bunch of us would end up getting roped into doing the play test, because you'd have some local person who wrote an adventure, collaborating with the triad. The triad would say, yeah, that's a good idea, write something up, what kind of a synopsis of where you want this, what your plot is, and we can tentatively approve it, and then they would do the play test, and they would send the stuff, and it would be edited, and then it would eventually go up to the
sounds
Wizards
like
of the Coast.
it sounds like with Living Greyhawk, it was much more of a big community. You could get involved, and there was give and take. And I think when I experienced Living Forgotten Realms, it was just more, here are the pre-published adventures. And I remember the DMs who were running them at the table. I remember them talking about, they had all gotten together a couple nights before and played through them as players with one person running them, and then that kind of prepped them to play. By the time it got to encounters, it was just like, here's your packet, do whatever you're gonna, good luck, have fun. We're not going to tell you how to do it.
But there was a whole lot of buy-in. When third edition had been announced back in the late 90s. There's that website, the EN World, which was the guy talking. It's like Eric Norris. I forget what EN stands for, the initials of the guy that originally ran it, and then he ended up turning it over to somebody else, as I recall. But
Russell Morrissey.
Oh, okay. And they were just going on and on about the third edition, and so these people, the history of Living Greyhawk, they had started a couple of years before, or like at least a year before third edition had come out, where they had said, okay, we're going to do this campaign, and everybody's like super hyped. Oh, it's Greyhawk. It's, all these classic adventures, against the giants and
White Blue Mountain, Tomorrow, blah blah. Yeah.
Most importantly, the Temple of Elemental
Evil. Though Temple of Elemental Evil and Greyhawk City and some of those areas, they were hands off. There was no region. They were core adventures where they would come directly out of the Circle of Six.
I have, and speaking of rewards, I still have them on my shelf over here, tokens and maps and stuff I got it for running encounters.
Yeah, you would.
We're kind of getting close to the end of our time. How much experience do you guys have with Adventurers League? That's kind of the new 5th edition. They did encounters for a brief period in early 5th edition, but then they switched to Adventurers League, I think, fairly early on.
Yeah, I think what's cool about Adventurers League, and this kind of in a way, I know we've been talking mostly about organized play, but what I think is cool about Adventurers League is that, you can play like side adventures, but you could also play the core adventure path, right? So a lot of people might not necessarily play Adventurers League, and they run, Ghost of Saltmarsh, right? But you could run Ghost of Saltmarsh through Adventurers League or whatever, whatever. And, I think that's pretty cool. Is that you can, in a way, it's kind of merged both your home campaign and your if you want to experience the organized play, you could play a campaign. If you want to, play a home campaign.
You kind of, I don't know if it's going to be garbled on the recording, but kind of garbled there on my end. I don't know. So.
Oh, really?
But but I think you were saying you can play Adventurers League with the published kind of hardback modules. They market to everybody, or you could play the ones that are specifically developed for Adventurers League. I know when I've gone in and played a few times, they've always been running whatever the hardback is that's kind of freshly out. But I know some of the things with it.
Yeah, I know that groups that run that, at least at Dragon's Lair, groups that run that, they get like advanced copy and they run through it, beforehand.
Yeah.
So then kind of a preview what's coming out. So that's one of the perks we're talking about. But
sorry about that. I think I cut you off. What were you saying?
We keep interrupting each other today, BJ. Even in
I know. I think there's a little lag between our feeds.
Maybe.
I know when I played, and I haven't done a lot of Adventures League. When I've gone and played, I've enjoyed it. It's usually with some new novice players where some have never played and some have only been playing for a little while. Tend to be younger players a lot of times, teenagers, college students. Which I don't mind playing with younger people. It doesn't bother me, but I know some of the more controversial rules have been you can only use one supplemental book and the player's handbook to build your characters, which creates a barrier to some of the more interesting character builds. For example, like the Genasi is in one, not in a player's handbook. It's in a supplement, but then a lot of the elemental theme subclasses that you would want to pair with the Genasi character also aren't in the player's handbook. So you can't, and they're not in the same book because they publish the class subclasses in different books and they do supplemental character races and ancestry. So you can't mix. I think they're starting to lax up on that. I don't know. I haven't checked in a while, but the other thing I've noticed is I feel like having run several of the hardback adventures is they write them with an idea that you can run them as an adventurers league. And so it's when you're playing with a home game, you've got kind of a loosey-goosey plot. Yeah. And people who are wanting it was going to be the same group of us. We're going to buckle down. We're going to play this for the next 9 to 12 months. The plot holes become a lot more apparent because, when it's a slightly different group every week, you can go, now, here's what happened last time. And that may not be what happened last time. You can kind of edit it to set up the next scenario. But people are like, hey, no, that didn't happen last time. Or, well, no, we did this. Now what do we, it's a lot easier for them to kind of get out in left field and get off. And they've tried less and less to make them railroads. I mean, that first Tyranny of Dragons was a railroad. Yeah. But it was meant to demo the adventure, the system. So a lot of the introduction.
That can be a problem with shared campaigns just in general, is that you need to have kind of stopping points where, like, if for a lot of the ones that pretty much, most every single one that for Living Greyhawk, it was either a 4-hour block or an 8-hour. There were some introductory adventures where, kind of like what you were saying about the encounters thing, where it'd be like 3 or 4 like little miniature adventures where it was like, just like an encounter and, stuff. But when you have a longer adventure that is ported over into that format, and there is no real, I mean, there's a whole document. I've got it somewhere on my computer. That was writing adventures for Living Greyhawk, and it was like, this is sort of how it's supposed to be set up with the time limits and the treasure. You didn't want to have the treasure where it was like 90% of the treasure was all in one item, because then at the end of the adventure, when it was like, well, who's going to get this item? Now they did change things eventually to how they distributed loot, but they got really,
they started doing parcels where it's like, okay, here's the parcel. Who gets this one? And if there's a magic item in it, you got less gold, right?
At the end, about halfway through Living Greyhawk, they ended up getting rid of the certificates, and then they just started to have it where at the end of the adventure, there was you had a sheet that was called an adventure record, an AR, and it had the name of the adventure and the region and the date and who ran it and signatures and all that, and it had a little blurb, and then it said you have access to these items, and you had access for like the next 3 adventures or something, and as long as you had the gold, you could sort of you got gold, and then you got access to the items. So you could have like a magic sword or something, And it was like, maybe everybody at the table ended up getting that magic sword because they ended up having the gold and they wanted it. Because early on it was the certificates, and that and there's conventions where it's like, I remember one time where there was like this dickering back and forth about, no, well, that item's perfect for my character. And this guy's like, well, that's something that I would like to have. And then it kind of just like ground to a halt. And it was like, hey guys, the next game is starting up. You guys gotta, and it's like guys throwing down their, stuff, and fine, go and take it. I don't give a and storming off kind of thing. People almost come into blows.
So it sounds like just to kind of recap, where we started off talking about Living Greyhawk, and even before that, there was stuff the RPGA did, where it was this very wide give and take, massive event between fans and players and local organizers and retailers and convention coordinators and the RPGA and TSR, kind of all working together in different capacities. And that's kind of shrunk down now to where they've gone through several iterations where it basically Wizards of the Coast just publishes some adventures and says, you can use this for Adventures League. Here's the guidelines, and it's still, they still kind of control it and license it and stuff, but it's much more, it seems like they've tried to make it easier for everybody to get involved. But I think, to me, it sounds like it would still be something to be appealing to go back to the idea of there's like a couple thousand people across the country all contributing to how this thing is going, and we're all part of it together. But I don't know if that would be feasible anymore.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the process is, but it seems like the creativeness is in the hands of, especially with Wizards and running the published adventures, right, through an Adventures League format.
Yeah.
Like the creativeness is in like smaller group of people. I don't know how Paizo does it, or if they, if these guys ever have. I mean, I know like I've seen Chaosium have contests right before, but or occasionally Paizo will have a contest and then that person will write something for them. But generally speaking, it doesn't seem like that spontaneous. It seems like what Matt was talking about. Sometimes there's this like one of the players spontaneously came up with an idea and then he'd run it through the group in charge of the region, and then something cool would happen, right? But now it's like it's very organized from the top, and I don't know how much filters out. We could all be wrong about this, but I guess I'm not as involved in organized play as I was when I was, working at a Dragon's Lair. But
yeah, I can't remember if Liren from Updates from the Middle of Nowhere, I can't remember if she had said on one of her things that she had done a lot more Adventurers League play. I may be misremembering that. We could use, I don't know if she's following Cerebrivore, but maybe she'd give us a call if she hears this.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I know she's mentioned it, but I can't remember if she was meaning she had done a lot of it or like she had tried it times.
Yeah, I know Jules runs a lot of public events in different regions. I don't know if she's run a lot of published adventures, but I don't know if she does it through like the Adventures League or organized play format. And of course she runs her own stuff too. So
yeah, cool
to hear from her as well. But
and you guys, those are a couple of podcasts of kind of the anchor community. That's Jules from NZ, who she's all the way from New Zealand, and then Liren, who does updates from the middle of nowhere all the way from Virginia.
Yeah.
So we've been going on for a little less than an hour. We're probably need to wrap it up. Any Matt, any final comments? Any final thoughts?
Not really.
Yeah.
Okay.
Carl, you got anything you want to go out on?
I mean, I guess I haven't been as much into organized play recently, and I was talking to Dragon's Lair the other day, and they're like, "Oh, we really would like someone to come in and kind of reboot their Paizo organized play, so Starfinder or PF2." And of course, as you know, with any edition change, there's a lot of people who shake their fist at the change. So I think it's probably suffered a little for Paizo, but
yeah.
But I mean, I might get back into it, and then I'll let you guys know. But my experience with Adventures League, I mean, I don't play as much 5e really, so it's been far and few between, and I'd rather much run like a full adventure than these short, not really very, I would say very railroady, because I guess they're convention style or organized play style type adventures. So
Yeah. I never can't I can't. I'm just not constitutionally predisposed to run a written module as it's written. Tried it, it doesn't work for me, and it works better when I just kind of take the pieces I want. I can generally follow the concept and the plot, but I like it when players go off script and I can feel free to just follow them where they're going. But I also like it when I can go off script because I think of a cool idea that I. But it's a very good. I mean, if you're not part of a gaming group, you need to meet people. That's a very good way to meet people and learn the game, and then make maybe some friends and contacts that you're like, hey guys, why don't we get together, on the weekend, and I'll run one of the pre-written scenarios we haven't ever been through, or I'll make something up. And so if you're new to D&D, organized play is a really good way to get into it if you don't have friends that can kind of bring you in with an existing group. And I think it's always, if you've never DM'd, it's always useful to play a little bit before you DM if possible. And that may be one way to get some experience as a player before you decide, okay, now I'll serve as the DM for my friends.
Yeah, and I think that's the intention. The intention was initially to put these organized plays or the newer ones, right? Is to be more of a gateway to starting your own group. But I feel, when I go into Dragon's Lair on a Wednesday or on a Saturday, I see the same people, and that's their game, right? They rarely play outside of that, and that's okay too. Just what do people want? Maybe they just want that sort of.
It's meant to be Eddie Munson standing by the gate at the park, going, "Hey kid, you want a D20? First one's free."
Yeah, definitely the RPGA, at least in that era, was kind of recruitment. I think way going back to the early 80s, late 70s, I think it was actually I think TSR made a bunch of money doing the convention sort of games. But
that would be another good panel topic to talk about on another episode is convention, the convention play, convention experience. I've ever actually gone to a con.
What?
So.
But we're getting you to North Texas next year.
Yeah, I will be at. There's one going on in Norman, 40 miles from me next week, but I've got to be at a professional conference the same days for my job. So, and there's no getting out of it because I'm one of the convention coordinators.
Cool.
But that's actually, I had moved to North Carolina in 1999. I was without a D&D home group, and I went to that first convention, somewhat because third edition was new, and they had a couple of the people that had worked on the rules that were going to be there talking, but it was a big part of it was to find a group. Back then it was still 3x5 cards on a bulletin board at the game store. We got an opening in our group, send your resume and interview.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, let's go ahead and wrap up there. Yeah. That we'll stop there.
That's a great point to stop with. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. So I want to again, Matt, thank you for sitting in with us. We're up a little late tonight on a Wednesday night, but appreciate your telling us about your experiences and be a part of the conversation. So anytime you want to come back, let us know.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool. Carl, thanks for hanging out. Everybody check out Carl's podcast, The GMologist Presents. And check out my podcast. I've been a little sporadic the last several weeks. I've kind of gotten kind of busy. I'm going to try to get back into a regular flow, and that is The Arcane Alienist. You can find them both on Anchor. You can find them both. Most of the major podcatchers pick them up at this point. Apple, Spotify, all those places. And, of course, this is Cerebrivore, also on Anchor and Podcasters, and also on YouTube. So check us out there. We've got several episodes we've already recorded and many more to come, hopefully. So thank you all for listening, and wherever you are, take care. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, thanks for hosting us there, BJ.
stars and parts past. Cerebral podcast. You're counting down your last as you admire them all. Something's plenty. Oh, so escaping your brain. Then what I mean is this is shades of fake. And from what I understand, don't look now, the Super Bowl is coming. And all that's left is the crying and the running. You can bring it, you can pile, you can bomb in any order. Just another brain of people tossers running for the border. Just a snapcracker running. Did I stutter? Here and here. It's breaded buds you can eat on a bacon. And his customers never say it. Wasn't savory, the flavor of the movies it created.